Hello there everybody, Martin here from Affinity for Commander. Today we have another brilliant EDH gameplay video for you to enjoy, so without further ado, let's take a look at those opening hands. I am playing my Oloro Ageless Aesthetic Life Game deck, and keep an opening hand consisting of Authority of the Consoles, Ajani's Pridemate, Azorius Signet, Utter End, Godless Shrine, Dwar Isle Refuge, and the Plains.
Tom is playing his Najeela, the Blade Blossom Warrior Tribal deck, and after mulliganing 3 times, keeps a starting hand of Herald of Dramoka, Pillar of Origins, Anguish of Making, Croson Verge, and a Forest.
Will is playing his Kirik Son of Yawgmoth Life Lost deck, and keeps a hand containing Soul Ring, Tainted Strike, Succumb to Temptation, Chainer Dimension Master, Reliquary Tower, and 2 Swamps.
And finally, Thomas is playing his Grist, the Hunger Tide control deck, and keeps an opening hand of Findhorn Elves, Soul Ring, Tragic Slip, Command Tower, Deathcap Glade, Fable Passage, and Reflecting Pool. Thomas wins the die roll and plays Command Tower. Next he casts Findhorn Elves and passes to Martin.
I gain 2 life in my upkeep thanks to Oloro's triggered ability and play a Plains. I use this land to cast Authority of the Consoles and pass.
Will plays a Swamp, casts Soul Ring, and ends his turn.
Tom plays Croson Verge and passes to Thomas.
Thomas starts his turn by casting a Soul Ring of his own, and then plays Reflecting Pool. Next he taps both of his land to cast Sign in Blood, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life, and passes.
I gain 2 life, which I then pay to play an untapped Godless Shrine. Next I tap out to cast Ajani's Pridemate and end my turn.
Will plays a Swamp and passes to Tom.
Tom plays a Mountain and taps out to cast Pillar of Origins. He names Warrior when the artifact enters the battlefield and passes.
Thomas begins his turn by playing Deathcap Glade and then casts his commander, Grist, the Hunger Tide. He activates the Planeswalker's +1 ability, creating a 1/1 insect token that enters tapped, and milling a non-insect card. Martin gains a life thanks to Authority of the Consoles, and Ajani's Pridemate gains a +1/+1 counter thanks to the life gain.
Synergy!
Not yet finished, Thomas casts Cultivate, and Will responds this by casting Succumb to Temptation. Will draws 2 cards and loses 2 life in the process, and Thomas searches his library for a snow-covered swamp and a snow-covered forest. He puts the former into play tapped and the latter into his hand, and ends his turn.
I gain 2 life, putting a +1/+1 counter on my kitty, and play Dwar Isle Refuge as my land for turn. I gain another life, put another +1/+1 counter on my cat, and move to combat, where I attack Tom with the aforementioned creature. Tom takes 5 damage in this way, and I move to my second main phase. Here I cast Azorius Signet and pass to Will.
Will plays a Swamp and pays 4 life to help cast his commander, Kirik, Son of Yawgmoth. The former human enters the battlefield tapped, gaining Martin a life and putting a +1/+1 counter on his Pridemate. Not yet finished, Will casts Viscera, paying 2 life to do so. Like Kirik before them, the vampire enters tapped, gaining Martin another life and putting a +1/+1 counter on his Catman. Kirik also gets a +1/+1 counter thanks to his own ability, and not wishing to spend any more life this turn, Will passes the turn.
Tom plays a Forest and ends his turn.
In his turn, Thomas plays Windswept Heath and activates Grist's +1 ability. He makes a tapped insect, gaining Martin a life, and mills a non-insect card. Martin puts a +1/+1 counter on Ajani's Pridemate, and with all of his mana still available, Thomas passes to Martin.
I gain 2 life, put a +1/+1 counter on my feline, and play a Swamp. Moving to combat, I attack Will with my Swole Kitten, dealing him 9 damage, and pass the turn.
Will plays Reliquary Tower, and then casts Commander's Sphere. Next he casts a Temerate, chosen from Death, who enters tapped, gaining Martin a life. Both Ajani's Pridemate and Kirik get a +1/+1 counter, and Will moves to combat, where he attacks Martin with his commander. Before damage, Martin casts Utter End, and Will responds by sacrificing Kiddick to Visarasia. He scries 1, moving the top card of his library to the bottom, and Will ends his turn. In response to this, Tom sacrifices Crowson Verge, and in response to this, Thomas sacrifices his Windswept Heath. Thomas pays 3 life to put Overgrown Tomb into play untapped from his library, and Tom puts Irrigated Farmland and Sheltered Thicket onto the battlefield. With no further interruptions, Tom proceeds to his turn.
Tom starts his turn by casting his commander, Najeela the Blade Blossom, gaining me a life and putting a +1/+1 counter on my Pridemate. Next he casts Rampant Growth, putting a swamp into play tapped from his library, and passes to Thomas. Thomas responds to this by casting a rather pretty Tainted Pact, revealing cards from the top of his library until he finds Deadly Tempest. Thomas puts the board wipe into his hand, exiles the other revealed cards, and moves to his turn.
In his turn, Thomas plays a snow-covered forest, and then casts the Deadly Tempest that he just found. Will responds to this by sacrificing all of his creatures due to Visarasia's ability, and the board is then wiped of all remaining creatures. Thomas loses 3 life, and both Martin and Tom lose 1 life to the spell, and Thomas activates Grist's +1 ability. He creates a tapped insect, gaining Martin a life, and mills a non-insect card before passing the turn.
I gain 2 life from my upkeep, and play a Plains as my land for turn. Next I cast Bloodthirsty Aerialist, which is basically just an Ajani's Pridemate with wings, and end my turn.
Will plays a swamp and recasts his commander, paying 2 life to do so. Kiddick enters tapped, gaining Martin a life, and putting a +1/+1 counter on his vampire, and Will passes to Tom.
Tom plays a Plains, recasts Najeela, and casts Shana, Sisay's Legacy. I gain 2 lots of 1 life, put 2 +1/+1 counters on my Aerialist, and Tom passes the turn.
Thomas begins his turn by casting Persist, return the Fleshbag Marauder in his graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. Martin gains a life, putting a +1/+1 counter on his creature, and state-based actions cause the Marauder to immediately die due to it having 0 toughness. The Zombies trigger still goes on the stack though, and each player sacrifices a creature, leaving Najeela as the only creature left standing.
Or kneeling, she is tapped after all.
Not yet finished, Thomas plays Fabled Passage and casts Tragic Slip. He gives Najeela a -13/-13 in this way, sending her back to the command zone, and activates Grist's +1 ability. He creates a tapped insect, gaining Martin a life, and mills another non-insect card before ending his turn.
I gain 2 life, play an island, and cast my commander, Oloro, Ageless Aesthetic. With nothing more to do, I pass to Will.
In his turn, Will taps his commander's sphere for a black mana and sacrifices it to draw a card. He then casts Chainer, Dimension Master, gaining Martin a life, and allowing him to activate Oloro's ability. Martin draws, Will, Tom and Thomas lose a life, and Will passes the turn.
Tom draws and taps out to recast his commander. I gain a life, and Tom ends his turn, to which Thomas responds by sacrificing his Fabled Passage. He searches his library for a forest, puts the land onto the battlefield, and moves to his turn.
Thomas casts Witherbloom Apprentice, gaining Martin a life, and then casts Long Rest, where X is 2. He drains the table for 1 with his Apprentice's ability, and puts the Sign in Blood and Tragic Slip in his graveyard into his hand. Next he plays Bajuka Bog, exiling Will's graveyard with the land's ETB. Thomas then activates his commander's -2 ability, sacrificing his insect to destroy Oloro in this way. With no further plays, he passes to Martin.
I gain 2 life, play a Plains, and cast Sanguine Bond. Next I cast Falcon Wrath Noble, and pass.
Will starts his turn by casting Plaguecrafter, triggering multiple of Martin's non-land permanents as he does so. Martin gains a life from his authority, draining Will for 1 with Sanguine Bond as he does so. Plaguecrafter's ETB then resolves, with Tom sacrificing Najeela, Thomas sacrificing his apprentice, Martin sacrificing his noble, and Will sacrificing his shaman to their own ability. This triggers Falconwrath Noble's ability 4 times, gaining Martin 4 life and having Will lose a further 4, and Martin uses blood-based enchantment to have Thomas lose 4 life as well.
So many triggers.
Moving to combat, Will attacks Grist with Chainer, and Thomas responds by giving him -13 and -13 with Tragic Slip. Not to be deterred, Will moves to his post-combat main phase. Here he casts Carrion Feeder, followed by Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Martin gains 2 life, has Will lose 2 life, and Will ends his turn.
In his turn, Tom casts Rushblade Commander, whose ability is a bit useless with Authority of the Consuls out. I gain a life when she enters the battlefield, have Thomas lose 1, and Tom then casts Herald of Jamoka.
Another less than useful ability when creatures enter tapped.
I gain a life, this time having Tom lose a life, and Tom passes to Thomas.
Thomas casts Eternal Witness, gaining Martin a life and losing 1 himself in the process. He returns a Tainted Pact in his graveyard to his hand, casts it, and reveals cards on the top of his library until he finds Assassin's Trophy. Thomas puts the instant into his hand, exiles the other cards revealed, and casts a spell, destroying Sanguine Bond. Martin puts a swamp into play from his library as compensation for the removed enchantment, and Thomas activates his commander's +1 ability. He makes a Buggy Boy, gaining Martin a life, and mills a non-insect card before passing the turn.
I begin my turn by gaining 2 life, play a Plains, and cast Indulgent Patrician. Not wishing to do anything else at this time, I end my turn.
Will starts his turn by moving straight to combat, attacking Grist with both of his creatures. The Planeswalker takes 2 damage, and Will moves to his second main phase. Here he casts Feast of Succession, giving all creatures -4/-4, and clearing the board of creatures once again.
If we could go 1 round without everything dying, that would be super.
Will then becomes the Monarch, and passes to Tom, drawing in his end step as he does so.
Tom plays a Forest, and casts Bow of Nylea before passing.
Thomas casts Harmonize, drawing 3 cards, and activates Grist's +1 ability. He makes an Insect, gaining Martin a life, and mills a non-insect card. Next, Thomas plays a Swamp, and ends his turn.
In my turn I gain 2 life, and recast Oloro. With 2 mana remaining, I pass to Will.
Will plays a Swamp, and taps out to cast Villis, Broker of Blood. Martin gains a life, and pays 1 mana to draw a card, having the rest of the table lose a life as he does so. Unable to do anything else, Will passes to Tom, and Tom responds by using his bow to gain 3 life.
Hey, that's my thing!
Will then draws from the Monarchy, and Tom proceeds to his turn.
Tom draws and passes without casting anything.
How suspicious. Realising that he can't keep wiping the board forever, Thomas decides to take a big risk by casting Peer into the Abyss, targeting himself. He draws 30 cards, losing half his life, and not finding the card he was looking for, casts Imperial Seal. Thomas loses 2 more life and searches what remains of his library for a particular card. He puts this card on top of his library and casts Sign in Blood, to which Tom responds by casting Chaos Warp. He targets Grist with the spell, and Thomas puts his commander into the command zone. He then shuffles his library, revealing the top card to be Temple of Malady, and puts the land onto the battlefield. Thomas scries, keeping the top card of his library where it is, and Sign in Blood then resolves. He draws 2 cards, loses 2 life, and casts Scheming Symmetry.
Thomas really wants to find that card.
Knowing that whoever he picks to tutor alongside him will most likely find a way of stopping his plans, Thomas selects the only non-blue player at the table as his second target. Both Thomas and Will search their libraries for a card, putting them on top of their libraries, and Thomas then casts Caustic Caterpillar. Martin gains a life and pays 1 mana to Oloro's ability. He draws a card, causing the rest of the table to lose a life, and Will draws a card as a result of Villas's ability. Thomas then discards down to 7 and ends his turn.
I begin my turn by gaining 2 life and pay 1 mana to draw a card thanks to Oloro. Each of my opponents loses 1 life when I do this, Will draws a card, and I play Radiant Fountain, gaining 2 more life. I pay another mana to draw another card, having Will, Tom and Thomas lose another life, and Will draws another card thanks to his demon. Moving to combat, I attack Will with Oloro, dealing him 4 damage. He draws 4 more cards, and I gain control of the monarchy.
Long live the king.
In my second main phase, I cast Serra Ascendant, who enters as a 6/6 with flying and lifelink, draw a card from the monarchy, and pass to Will.
Will plays a swamp and casts Exquisite Blood. Next he casts Animate Dead, return the Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose in his graveyard to the battlefield, and Martin gains a life from his authority. Knowing that Will can trigger an infinite combo with Veto and Exquisite Blood when he attacks with his demon, Martin pays 1 mana to draw a card, desperately hoping to find an answer to the issue before him. Will, Tom and Thomas all lose 1 life, and Will draws a card with Villas. Will then gains 2 life thanks to Exquisite Blood, and has Thomas lose 2 life with Veto's ability. Unfortunately for the table, Martin didn't draw anything that could help, and Will uses his life draining combo to take Thomas out of the game. He then continues the combo, this time targeting Martin, and Tom responds to the vampire's life loss trigger when Martin is on 1 life. Tom uses his bow's ability to gain 3 life, and then immediately loses this to exile Veto with Anguished Unmaking. Once the creature is removed from the battlefield, the stack resolves, with the final Veto trigger reducing Martin's life total to 0. Will regains control of the monarchy, and moving to combat, attacks Tom with Villas. Tom is dealt 8 damage, Will gains 8 life from his enchantment, and Will draws from the monarchy before passing the turn.
In his turn, Tom casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Villas. Will responds to this by activating his creature's ability 3 times, losing 6 life to give his demon -3/-3. Will draws 3 cards thanks to Villas' ability, and the demon is then exiled, gaining Will 5 life. Unable to do anything else, Tom ends his turn.
Will casts Black Blade Reforged, and then casts Burnished Heart. Not yet finished, he casts Sadistic Sacrament, exiling 3 cards from Tom's library, then draws a card before passing to Tom. Tom responds to this by gaining 3 life with Bow of Najeela, and then proceeds to his turn.
Tom starts his turn by casting Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive, closely followed by Zulaport Cutthroat. Still holding on in there, Tom passes the turn.
Will casts Sorin Markov and activates his +2 ability, targeting Zulaport Cutthroat.
Wait, Sorin has abilities other than his -3?
Apparently. The rogue is destroyed, Will gains 2 life, and the Cutthroat's ability triggers, gaining Tom 1 life and draining Will for 1. Will then passes, drawing a card from the monarchy, and Tom gains 3 life with his bow before moving to his turn.
Tom plays Unclaimed Territory, naming Warrior, and recasts his commander. He then ends his turn, and Will responds by casting Hero's Downfall. He destroys Najeela in this way, and moves to his turn.
Will plays a swamp, and equips his Black Blade to his Burnished Heart. Next he uses Sorin's -3 ability to reduce Tom's life total to 10, and casts the swift end part of Murderous Rider. Will destroys Tetsuko Umezawa in this way, losing 2 life in the process, and proceeds to attack Tom with his sword-wielding elk, winning him the game.
Well, that is it for another game. I hope that you enjoyed watching Tom put up a valiant fight against Will's infinite combo. I'd like to take this opportunity to give a huge thank you to each and every one of our fantastic patrons, without whom we'd be unable to continue making videos such as these. Also, be sure to check out our affiliate links in the video description. It won't cost you anything extra to buy your product through them, but it really helps out the channel. And finally, don't forget that you can help to support our channel in 4 quick and easy ways: liking this video, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, and leaving us a comment. I read every one. That's it for now though guys, we'll see you next time. Stay awesome!